Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 323 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is self-awareness. Our quote of the day comes to us from Gretchen Rubin. Self-awareness is a key to self-mastery. Before we jump into today's episode, please go ahead and subscribe to our show and leave us a 5-star review, as that helps our show reach more people and ultimately spread our no-quit message. I really enjoyed speaking to our guest today, and I think you'll appreciate hearing from Jesse Todisco. Being self-aware of our own negative thoughts is something I think we all need to be more aware of. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Jesse, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Brother, it's great to be here.
I appreciate it. I had the honor and privilege of recording on your show, and I love when we get the chance to flip the script. First question I ask each guest is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Born ready.
I knew that would be some type of something along the lines of born ready or you're always ready. The number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you have either a no-quit story of your own or perhaps a challenging time where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Oh my goodness. I'll tell you about the times I have quit that have taught me how not to quit on myself. So for a narrative in my life was I was shown through example on how to quit. And I picked that up as a young kid. And whenever I didn't like something, I would quit. And that led into jobs where if I didn't like something in a job, I'd walk away. I wouldn't even give a notice. And it was very poor character now looking back at it. But my example of quitting started from quitting too much when things got a little difficult. And then I started realizing I went through, this is the best time I quit anything. I went through a 2-year drug addiction. And that drug addiction, I quit that drug addiction and haven't looked back. I haven't touched drugs since. And I was shooting heroin. I was selling drugs. Like I was in a bad way for a couple of years. And I finally quit and I joined the military and it changed my life. And so from 2006 until now, 2021, 15 years, I haven't touched drugs. I haven't thought about drugs. And so that was the best thing I've ever quit. But I was a quitter up until that point.
I appreciate you touching on that. And I think it's incredible, that idea and that concept of quitting. And so many people have used that question in different ways. And I just applaud you for not only sharing what you did. Interesting question we ask each guest is, if you had to define yourself, but you could only pick one word, what word did you pick?
Love.
I got to ask you to expand on that.
Okay, so I am a weird dude. I'm into spirituality and health and wellness and biohacking, if you will, and optimizing my life and relationships, spirituality, everything, right? And in that effort, you have to start with self-love. And I realized about a year ago that I wasn't loving myself. And much like many men, I was stuffing emotions down, not paying attention to those things. And then with the work of sacred plant medicines and a lot of self-work, the first thing that came to me was to be and receive more love in the world. And to do that, I had to love myself. And you have to have self-love and self-care before you can pour into anyone else's cup.
And I think that idea and the concept of self-love, I think it gets such a negative image from the outside of self-love is this spiritual, everything's perfect, where it's really not. And I think the self-love and the people that have described it to me and talk about it, it's really that inner reflection and building from the inside out. And I'm glad you touched on that. Based on how you just answered that last question, something that we've been talking about over the last year to 2 years is the importance of a morning routine. And I have to ask, do you have a morning routine that you swear by?
Absolutely. So I am not a coffee guy. I am naturally energetic. If I drink coffee, it's like I'm on some sort of stimulant, literally, but like an illegal one. And so when I get up in the morning, I train. And so I'm into some weird training protocols. There's a company called Onnit, ONNIT, that I follow. And they do things with like club maces and steel clubs and animal flow and all sorts of just fun working out stuff. So I like to move my body and stay purposeful. I then take a freezing ass cold shower, and there's so many benefits to that. And then depending on my morning, I might try to squeeze in a quick meditation or an audio book before I get started. And then I get started with my day, and then I start working, and then I just hammer out the day through working.
So I got to touch on that freezing shower. This has been something that I'm fascinated with. How long is that shower?
The whole time.
So like a 20-second shower and you're good? You just get in, get out?
2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Oh, okay.
It's freezing the whole time. Yeah, I started a couple of years ago with Wim Hof. For those who know who Wim Hof is, he had this January cold shower challenge. And there's a calendar you can print off, and it's out there on the ether if you just type it into Google. And it starts off with 20 seconds a day. And then it builds up by 5 or 10 seconds. By the end of the month, you're up to a couple minutes. And what it does for inflammation and changing, your mitochondria on the cellular level, if we're going to get nerdy, and like all these different things, it helps you live healthier. But just like our boy, David Goggins, it makes you a tough ass dude. Like it makes you, if you could take a cold shower, you could do the things that you don't want to do. Right. And so I think that the mindset behind it, which I'm huge on mindset. And if we were in my office, you'd see a picture that says mindset with a goldfish and a shark fin. But the mindset that comes from it is one of the best things outside of the energy and the health effects.
I'm so glad you touched on the beginning part of that answer, is how that calendar starts with 20 seconds a day. And I think you talked about biohacking, and something that we often talk about on the show is reverse engineering a goal, an objective, a dream. And talking about Wim Hof, and many of my listeners know who Wim Hof is, and I've spoken about him, but the most successful programs, workout routines, audiobooks, fill in the blank, they don't talk about, okay, the best way to do this is tomorrow, go for your first run, and I want you to run 100 miles nonstop. That's something that David Goggins does, and he's at a whole new animal. But the successful programs, they talk about 1%. They talk about the first workout, the first meditation, the first cold shower, and it's not an hour straight. It's 20 seconds. Some things it's 5 seconds, one rep. So I'm really glad that you touched on that. One question we ask each guest is if you're currently reading something, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners. And selfishly, I ask this for my listeners, but I also ask it for myself because I've just heard about some amazing books from some of the guests that I didn't even know were out there.
There's two of them. One of them is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And we both love Goggins. He's an amazing archetype of what the mind can accomplish. And that book, the audio book, is what I highly recommend because it's like a podcast. It's the narration. It's the questions within. It's beautiful. He basically talks about Can't Hurt Me, which is, I've told you my scars, my skeletons, my wounds, kind of like that scene from 8 Mile where Eminem, he's gotten his teeth kicked in all movie long, literally and figuratively. He's got nothing left. And he just decides, you know what? I'm going to go out there on the offensive. I'm going to say, I am white trash. My mom is, a or whatever she does, you are better, whatever the deal is. And all of a sudden the guy had nothing to say to him. The guy that was beating him up all movie long could not diss him. And then it allowed Eminem to go on the offensive. So he took this power back. And so Goggins preaches that. He talks about Can't Hurt Me. He's had a crazy life childhood. I did too, in many different ways, some that was similar to his. And I was ashamed, especially growing up Catholic in Boston. I was ashamed, because that's what they preach. If you're Catholic, that's cool. No big deal. But I was ashamed about many things. And when I got to a point in my life a couple of years ago, I was like, my story, I had a mentor, Patrick Tucker, and he said, number one, you have an incredible story that needs to be shared. Number two, you know a bunch of amazing people that you could share it with. And that's kind of how my podcast was incepted. But I got over the fear of what other people might think and judge me on. And I told them about being bullied. I told them about my drug addiction, drug sales. Told them about my dad being a 35-year heroin addict. And you know what it did? Number one, it freed me. It allowed me to live my life without judgment. And the biggest thing, Chris, is it brought people into my life that I'm so tight with in a familial bond because the things they've been through and the things that they've seen. And so I think that's the biggest thing from the Goggins book. The other book was Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. So you get the hard, the mindset, you get the soft and the woo-woo and the spirituality is kind of who I am. I'm like a warrior monk. so with Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It, it really talks about loving yourself. And this goes back to earlier talking about love, but how to do it. There's a meditation in there. There's a way to the self-talk, the negative self-talk that we all have in our head. The other day I called myself an MFer, like the Queen Mother. And I'm like, why did I just say that to myself? Like, why did I just call myself an MFer? Like, where'd that come from? And so we all have this subliminal talk. And again, going into biohacking, I do stuff with binaural beats and meditation and trying to retrain my brain. But Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends On It talks about how to love yourself and gives you practical tools like Can't Hurt Me, gives you practical tools on how to accomplish the job.
I'm going to touch on the last thing you said in a minute, but you spoke about 8 Mile. I just watched a fascinating video on the gentleman that you were talking. I forget the actor's name, but he's the guy at the end where Eminem basically goes off and says, my mom, this. But the interesting perspective this actor shared is when he met Eminem and they were filming 8 Mile, near the end, Eminem came up to him and they were talking. He said, is it okay if I go off the cuff a little bit? And he said, yeah, no problem. And what Eminem did was he went and he did research on that guy, his real life. And some of those insults are things that are actual personal for him. And
Clarence has real nice parents.
Yeah, he had no idea that Eminem was going to do it. But the video was that they spoke about, that's when I knew that Eminem was really into the verbs and the words and the adjectives and how you go ahead and go through it, and it's just a fascinating video. But going back to what you said about that negative self-talk, I've been doing a lot of reading on that in the last couple months, and on average, people have said you have between 60 and 90,000 different thoughts that go throughout your mind on a 24-hour basis.
Wow.
And between 75 and 95% of them are negative. So even if it's on the low side of those, think about that for a second. If you had to give our audience maybe your input or advice, what's the best way to counter that negative self-talk? And maybe you shared your story about when you MF'd yourself. Is it something that you say to yourself? What do you do if and when those things come and you're going down that negative way?
First thing is self-awareness. You have to be aware of what you're saying to yourself, and you have to be aware that those 60 to 90,000 thoughts that you have in a day, even if a handful of them are negative, like, would you take that from somebody else? Would you take that from a significant other? Would you take that from a boss? Would you take that from anyone in your life? Has someone even told you one time to F off or called you an MFer? No. Why would you take that from yourself? Right. And so much like we talked about on my podcast, as kids, they grow and they start to get past that like goal setting stage. They lose the ability and they lose the training on how to set goals. We were never even given the training on how to correct our self-awareness and mindset. Like until the last few years, you have these thought leaders that have come around that are so big and they talk about it and they put their heart on a platter for people to hear. And so, when it comes to that, it's being self-aware of what's going on. But then like we talked about on my show, it's the execution of what you do with that information. And so for me, I've gotten really deep into people that talk about this stuff. And so there's binaural beats you can put in your headphones and have something downloaded, and you can do brain entrainment. You can listen to like law of attraction type stuff. But you have to be mindful and know that this is happening. And then as soon as that thought comes in your head, like let's say you screwed up or something happens or whatever, tell yourself you love yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror. And that's part of the book, Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends On It. Look at yourself in the mirror. When's the last time you did that? You looked in the mirror and said, I love you. It seems weird, but why does that seem weird? No one else is telling you they love you right now. You should be the only one. At least you're the one telling you that. If there's no one else in your life saying that, you can control that. And there's this magic that happens. You do this for 30 days and you follow the protocol inside that book. It creates magic in your life. Why wouldn't you want that?
First of all, I think that's so powerful the way you described it. And it's interesting how you spoke about what happens as kids and when we go through that transition, but it's what happens when we have those negative thoughts. And you said something that really hit me is you wouldn't tolerate it from a significant other or a best friend. But the crazy thing is why do we tolerate it for ourselves? So for example, if you and I were best friends and all you did every single time we saw each other is you put me down and, hey, Chris, you want to grab a drink after work? And I knew that for an hour and a half or 2 hours, you were just going to, insult me. Probably the second time you asked me out, I'm probably going to tell you, yeah, maybe next week I'm not going to go. But for some reason, we say it to ourselves, and many of us continually say it to ourselves. And I think it goes back to something that I talk about in regards to affirmations, not from that fairy tale, everything is wonderful. But if you're going into a sales meeting, mentally put yourself in the right frame of mind. You prepared for it. You have the numbers. You know your product or services. Doesn't mean you're going to go into it with an ego or this is, a home run or a slam dunk, but you're prepared. And if and when you succeed, you've done the work. If you don't, then you go back in your mind and say, okay, how can I learn from this, as opposed to I'm a failure, I can never do this. So I think you touched on some really, really interesting things. What does the word mentor mean to you? And have there been mentors that have really had a positive impact on your life?
My whole life has been filled with mentors. Because my dad for 35 years was a drug addict. He finally cleaned up the last 10 years of his life, became a pretty good dad, and became we call them puppetee to my kids. So it was great to see that. So I didn't have a mentor in terms of a dad growing up. I had to seek out mentors, and they started in t-ball. So I played t-ball growing up through basketball and football and martial arts. I sought out people to really just be a father figure, someone who could teach me things that my dad wasn't teaching me. And so that's where that came from. I told you on my podcast that I was a student at heart, and I still am. And so having a thirst for learning and knowledge and exploration, like that, my buddy who was here, he's I'm gonna shout him out. His name's Lane Balone. He's an ex-Green Beret, but he's a spiritual dude, and he's into really cool stuff. And we talked about it. We're like Indiana Jones, and when Doctor Strange comes together, that's kind of like where we are. We like to explore, we like to adventure and have fun. And surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded, surrounding yourself with people that have information that you don't. They don't have to be their title doesn't have to be mentor. They could be your friend, right? But seeking people out, and this is what you talked about earlier on my show, was relationships. What better way to build a relationship than to ask somebody a question or be really interested in what it is that they do? And maybe it's self-serving that you're going to learn something, but it's a beautiful handshake. You teach me something, I teach you something. And so for me, the importance of mentors, the last official mentors that I paid for a couple of years ago when I got my registered investment advisory practice off the ground, going from broker-dealer relationship to being independent investment manager, I used the services of Patrick Tucker. Patrick Tucker is a wealth manager out in Omaha, Nebraska. He's a guy with a big gnarly beard. He wears t-shirt and jeans. Like he's not your typical wealth manager. He has a sick book of business. He has this beautiful lifestyle business. He has a few other businesses on top of it. And he's just a good human being. He's into health and wellness. He's into family. So aligning myself with someone who I emulate that's 15 years down the road, number one. And then number two, on the other side, I have Paul Getter that I'm working with now. He's a mentor. And Paul Getter is this huge brand on Instagram. He's got 1.2 million followers. He's the guy behind Grant Cardone, Ty Lopez, Alex Mayer. He's helped Les Brown. But you don't know who he is until you work with him. And surrounding yourself with people that can level you up. And I'll give the listeners this because I think this is super important. I say this on every podcast, whether it's mine or someone else's. The rule of thirds. So in life, you should aspire to be in this paradigm. You have a third of your contacts, whether they're business or personal, that are ahead of you in the game. They can level you up. They can mentor you. They can help you avoid pitfalls. As financial services professionals, our biggest thing, people's like, yeah, give me a big return. Well, the biggest thing I do a lot of times is help people not screw up and protect them from something that they don't see. And so having someone who's already screwed up, like myself, that's part of my story. I've screwed up so much, I could pretty much help anyone not screw up. That's it's really having someone in that third is number one. Number two is having people like us that are doing life around the same pace or the same level or the same age. And we can share notes. We can compare war stories. We can talk about doing life together. And so now you have kind of that band of brothers and sisters to walk through life with. And then that bottom third are the people that are coming up, the people that want to learn, the people that want to grow. And then now it's your job and your duty as a good human being to pass on that knowledge. And so the importance of mentors, using the rule of thirds, is literally part of how I operate every day.
I love that. So perfect segue into my next question. I know you know the quote by Jim Rohn, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If I had the ability to grant you dinner with any 5 people, dead or alive, and you can sit with them at a table and level up and learn, who would those 5 people be?
I'd bring back my mom. She's passed. I'd bring her back. There's some questions I have for her that I'd like to have answered. I'd bring back Jesus. I think that's an all-time answer. I feel like there's a lot of questions I'd have for Jesus. There's a guy named Ram Dass who's very spiritual. I'd like to ask him some questions. He's passed away. I'd like to talk to Jordan just because I never did. And I had the opportunity twice. I told you about one time, but I missed it. And then the second time I saw him in a club called Butter in North Carolina, which was so silly. But saw him there, didn't ask him a question. That's 4. Put me on the spot. Probably Goggins. Yeah. And I would go through that list again and give you 5 different people, but just on the spot, those would be the 5 that come to mind.
I love that question. And I've asked it probably 30 times and not a single person has fired off, because it is a challenging question. And what people do is they do what you did, is they go back to, well, is there somebody in my life personally that has passed that maybe I want to speak with, or somebody that I'd like to, like a Jordan, and then someone that's just nuts like Goggins. And
anyone ever say Jesus?
A bunch of people have said Jesus. And the interesting part to that question is there is no right or wrong answer. It's personal. But the interesting thing as well is so many guests have reached out to me after and said, if this was a year later or 3 years earlier, that answer would be totally different. And that's the beauty, I think, of that question, because it's about evolving through your life, both personally and professionally. So we're going to switch now to what we call our hot seat questions. And the only request we have of you is that you spit out the first thing that comes to mind. Last meal, you can pick absolutely anything. What do you pick?
My homemade gravy and meatballs that my grandmother taught me how to make.
Favorite smell?
Anything that my ex-wife wears.
Favorite sport?
Martial arts.
Favorite team?
Patriots.
All-time favorite movie?
300.
All-time favorite author?
I mean, at this point, I'm going to go with David Goggins.
What is the favorite app you have on your phone?
Whoop. The Whoop strap. Yes, sir.
What is the background picture you have on your phone?
Self-discipline is making your bed every morning. Self-discipline is getting out of bed when your alarm clock goes off. Self-discipline is doing all the little things you don't want to do because they are needed to make the future life you want.
That's awesome. Do you have an all-time favorite book?
Can't Hurt Me, David Goggins.
Do you have an all-time favorite quote?
Memento Mori.
I love it. So 2020 was a challenging year, and 2021 has had its ups and downs. And I was curious if there's one or two people on social media that you follow that put up really positive and uplifting information or material that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Yes, sir. So one is someone that I had a chance to hang out with on a mastermind. His name is Aubrey Marcus. Aubrey Marcus was the CEO and founder of On It down in Austin, Texas. And he is also health and wellness guy, business guy, spiritual guy. So Aubrey Marcus is someone who I followed and continue to follow. And then, it's really funny, but recently Jack Black has been really cool. Jack Black, this is only the last couple months, but he's been putting out this great content where he'll dress up like a superhero and he's dancing and he's going silly, and he was doing the WAP song. Like he's so funny. So Jack Black recently, Aubrey Marcus since the beginning of the pandemic.
That is awesome. And then for our listeners who would like to connect with you and find out more about you, and also if you wouldn't mind sharing your podcast information so they can check that out as well. And also if you are active on social media.
Yeah. So social media, I do a lot there. You can find me on Instagram at Jesse, Jesse _T as in Thomas, EE. So at Jesse _T, do a lot of stuff there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I do a ton of stuff on LinkedIn. For those that are business minded or entrepreneurial minded, LinkedIn can be everything that you need. And I'm at Jesse, Jesse, last name Todisco. That's Todisco, Todisco, like to dance. And then, the website is, well, I won't talk about that. The podcast is The Jesse T Show.
Awesome. And last question I have for you is the same question I ask everybody. If you have some parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Love yourself like your life depends on it.
I think that's a fascinating and a perfect way to end today's episode. And I have to thank you for your time and what you shared with us today. And I definitely recommend our listeners connecting with you, but also check out some of Jesse's podcasts. So thank you, my man. And I know that you and I will connect again soon.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you for listening to episode number 323. I appreciate Jesse's transparency in sharing his personal no-quit story. I absolutely loved when Jesse shared his rule of thirds and the importance of people ahead of us in life, people that are currently going through life with us, and those people that we can mentor along the way. As we end today's episode, I would like to challenge everyone to be more aware of our own self-talk. If and when we find ourselves going down that negative talk rabbit hole, we need to refocus our thoughts on better and more positive things. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, always too early to quit.